Online sound check. April 4th, 2024, budget development meeting. Online sound check. April 4th, 2024, budget development meeting.
Hi, Bob.
Online sound check. April 4th, 2024, budget development meeting.
Yeah, sounded good in the room. Hopefully they're hearing me online. Thank you. Well, this is handy. You won't have to wonder where you should go or what. Nice to have. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to do a quick introduction of our new acting director, and then I will step off. I just want to personally thank you all for attending. I'm hoping we have a lot more people online than we have in the room. Means even more meaningful that we have some of our partners show up so we can talk directly to you. We'll talk a little bit about how we're going to take questions and comments here in a second. But without further ado, I'd like to introduce Davia Palmieri, our acting director.
Thanks, Shannon. And you didn't introduce yourself, so that's Deputy Director Shannon Hearn. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be here with you all today. It's my first week as the interim director. And as you know, if you follow our commission, we're hopeful to have that recruitment done by May 10th. So just a few more weeks. So I'm really grateful that you all are joining us today to talk about our budget development process. And as many of you know, it is slightly different than the last budget development. This is Governor Kotek's really first go around with budget development, and every governor has the opportunity to do it differently. So we really appreciate you all being here for this public engagement meeting. And we also acknowledge that the process is different than what you may have been used to. And so we really appreciate you working with us on that. So for our conversation today, a little bit of welcome and staff introductions. And then we'll get into really celebrating and thanking you all and highlighting great successes in our 2023-2025 legislative approved and adopted budget. We're really grateful for the work that you all do as our partners to create that success. And so we want to talk a little bit about that and then get into building our 2025-2027 budget request to kind of build on that success. As part of that, we'll talk about some areas of focal investment that we want to highlight in this process. And we have been thinking about as we've developed what you'll see today and what you'll see over the next few months as we get to the point of having a final agency request budget. There's lots of time for questions and discussion from you all here. And then online, we have a QR code that you should see right now with a URL if you can't figure out the QR code or it won't work for you. So please, we encourage you use that. There's a form where you can put your questions in as we go, and we'll try to address all those questions at the end of the conversation. And so we'll wrap up with a few of sort of the next steps and where we're headed from here. This is our first opportunity to talk with you all about it, but it's certainly not the last. And so I will pause there and just ask if the staff who are presenting can just introduce themselves really quickly. This is, maybe just stand up since I have the microphone. Sarah Reif is our Habitat Division Administrator. Debbie Colbert is our Deputy Director for Fish, Wildlife, and Habitat Programs. Yeah, I think it's this camera. Mike Harrington is our Fish Division Administrator, and Bernadette Graham Hudson, our Wildlife Division Administrator, and Shannon Hearn, our Deputy Director, as I mentioned before. And so they'll all introduce themselves when they come up to be part of the presentation. So I think we want to start every conversation about our budget with our mission. And I think by showing up in this forum, watching this video, if you're watching it later, you probably care about our mission as much as we do. And our mission is to protect and enhance Oregon's fish, wildlife, and their habitats for use and enjoyment by present and future generations. And this is really the foundation that the department builds from every time we're developing a budget and deciding how to use the state's resources and the revenue that we have to best serve fish and wildlife populations. And so I also wanted to start with a reminder about the department and how we're structured. You'll hear from our 3 division administrators, the Habitat Division, the Fish Division, and the Wildlife Division. They're organized under our Deputy Director for Fish and Wildlife Programs. You'll hear from our Deputy Director for Administration, who oversees the side of our organization that helps kind of support the mission through technical support, through budget development is a huge role, through procurement, contracting, HR, all of that. It's really key to what we do. And then I'll just highlight in the middle here, we have our East Region and West Region, and actually nearly 60% of ODFW staff is supervised through our regions, and that's staff based in our field offices. And so just another reminder that we have a really dispersed organization. We've got a network of 33 fish hatcheries, just over 200,000 of acres of land that we manage for wildlife habitat and public access. We've got 93 offices around the state. And so really just want to emphasize the fact that we talk about our budget through the lens of fish, wildlife, and habitat divisions, but the work that budget supports is happening everywhere in the state. And then finally, before we start diving into the budget conversation, just a reminder that the Oregon State Police Fish and Wildlife Division is a big part of our budget and is supported through the Department of Fish and Wildlife's budget. So the state police deliver law enforcement that complements our mission and implements some of the statutes that our commission, or the rules that our commission promulgates, investigates illegal harvest, and has a lot of contact with hunters and anglers in the field. And so with that sort of background reminder about who the department is, I'll turn it back over to Shannon for the rest of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you again, Shannon Hearn, Deputy Director for Administration. We're here today to start digging into the budget build. And when we do that, we kind of want to start with where we're at currently to kind of set the stage. But we're here to provide you with an overview of the agency request budget in pieces, and we'll step through that process. Purpose of today's meeting and convening you all is to answer questions and discuss the beginning of this as we are kicking off the process. Your input is very valuable. Your perspectives are very valuable in this process, and we're looking in the end to garner support for our agency's mission and our programs. And of course, they work for the same purpose that you have, supporting healthy fish, wildlife, and habitats. So to kick off again, we're stepping back into 23-25, the biennium we're currently in. This figure provides you with the information on our base budget and how, in general, our program areas are funded. This is a legislatively approved budget from the current biennium. Davia hinted at, there's a difference between legislatively approved and legislatively adopted. If you want to know that, go ahead and send us a question on it, and I'll do my best to explain. But really, it looks at the difference between when you come out of session with bills and then when you start adding in investments, and we're going to cover that for you here in depth. We also have 4 fund types, so I'm highlighting that on this slide because you're going to hear each about them individually. Federal fund, we get contracts and agreements from our federal partners to do work. They're very specific, dedicated funding. We get a small amount of lottery fund in our budget. It really does go into doing fish and wildlife programs. And then general fund, we get a direct apportionment from the state, and that's the color of money when it comes to us that way for general fund. But overall, there's this other fund bucket that I really need to explain to you, and it sounds just like what it is. Other funds are just about anything else that's not federal fund, general fund, or lottery fund. But really, it's where our license revenue is. It can be other contracted money from the state, say from OWEB. It can be grant programs that are set up in our budget. And we'll walk you through each of these fund types. Just wanted to make clear. Again, we're highlighting success in this phase. If you look at this budget overall, you'll see this sharp increase that we've seen from 21-23 into this 23-25 budget. We really owe our partners a debt of gratitude here, because for a long time we've been talking about expanding from the North American model of conservation. And we're a state that's very lucky not to be wholly dependent on license revenue and excise tax. But this steep increase within this budget, pretty unprecedented, and I'll show you that in a minute. So you've seen this big increase, and on the left, it shows you where that funding goes in general. So Davia called out our state police. They're our partner. They enforce the fish and wildlife laws. At the top, you'll see I've kind of lumped for you where our deferred maintenance and facilities are. We've been successful in general fund bonding, so we can maintain all of those facilities Davia mentioned. I want to highlight Habitat Division stands out on its own as a division. We were really excited in 2019 to reestablish that division. As Davia mentioned, the way we run our budgets, that division money gets pushed out to the regions. The Habitat Division includes the regional positions under them as well. It's a little more complicated for fish. You got to add the hatchery, inland fisheries, and the Marine Columbia programs to get Fish Division. And again, it rolls out to the regions. And then I want to point out for wildlife, we have wildlife conservation listed there. That's a small program really dedicated towards the Oregon Conservation Strategy and conservation work out of headquarters. And it needs to be lumped in with wildlife management that gets out pushed to the regions, because it's a misnomer to say, well, you've got one little bucket here for conservation. That's not true. All these folks do conservation. Sure. Again, celebrating the success. I wanted to trend line over time for you how our budgets have grown and adapted. Again, you'll get these materials posted online so you can really dig into those colors, but the very top dark color is lottery fund. That has not shifted much over time. Again, very beneficial in the Fish and Wildlife Division program budgets. The general fund increase we've laid out there from 17-19 to 2020. We have grown to 12% of our budget. We celebrate that all the time. And a percentage is a percentage, right? So you're taking a percentage of a larger amount. So there's a real success in seeing the all fund type growth and then maintaining 12% out of that growth. The other funds I want to touch on here again, just to highlight in that trend line increase, the growth that you're seeing there is not license fund. I'm going to highlight this specifically more, and I'll pull license fund out itself. But overall, these have been these really successful additions to our budget for private forest accord, Oregon Conservation Recreation Fund. Those kind of things are lumped in there, and you'll hear a lot more about them here in a minute. Highlighting again these session adjustments 2022 and 2024 here by fund type is what we garnered in those budgets. Again, Fish Wildlife Divisions will be highlighting each of these investments and how they were introduced into their programs. Final slide for me for a bit. Now we're bringing you the legislatively adopted budget where we roll in those 2024 legislative session investments. So you can see this is where we're landing as a 23-25 budget and where we will close it out with these fund types. Again, I've given you percentage by budget in a different way here. But the critical part of this in understanding is that this is an amazing time for fish and wildlife to have this diversity of funding and other funds, this amount of general fund. We've been able to do some pretty amazing things. And I didn't highlight it on the last slide, but it was there for you to see the growth we've had in federal funds. A lot of that is the bipartisan infrastructure law, bipartisan infrastructure law. Through partnering, our staff has really engaged to bring in millions to put on the ground for fish and wildlife research and monitoring and projects. A lot of projects we never thought we'd see in our careers a chance to fund because they were so big and landscape based. So that's a really exciting time for this agency. And I will turn it over to Bernadette so she can highlight those additions in the budget.
Hi, everyone. I'm Bernadette Graham-Hudson. I'm the Wildlife Division Administrator here in the department. And I am going to highlight some of the important investments in our current budget, as well as some of the programs that that funding supports. So the first key investment in our 23-25 budget is that of wildlife connectivity. So our wildlife connectivity work is informed by the Oregon Connectivity Assessment and Mapping Project that was recently wrapped up and resulted in the development of our priority wildlife connectivity areas. So those areas reflect the most important areas that support all wildlife species, from large ungulates down to the smaller mammals and amphibians. And the priority wildlife connectivity areas identify specific actions in each area, including protection, restoration, or mitigation. So that effort aligned really well with efforts to provide funding for habitat connectivity and wildlife crossing projects. So House Bill 5030 provided $5 million in lottery bond funding for projects to improve wildlife passage and connectivity. So that bond sale is scheduled for March of 2025, and that funding will be deposited in the Oregon Conservation and Recreation Fund to help support those projects. The second area to highlight is our work and improvement in capacity to do mule deer work. So we've collared over 1,400 mule deer and gathered more than 2 million location data points. This helps us better understand the individual herd ranges of mule deer in Oregon and also understand the migration and movement corridors that those animals use. So our efforts grew enough that we realized we needed better coordination to manage that work. And so we received a new investment to support a permanent position to coordinate research, monitoring, and conservation actions for mule deer in Eastern Oregon. The third investment area is that of into our wildlife areas. So ODFW's wildlife areas provide many benefits, including habitat connectivity. They support fish and wildlife populations, and they also support public access opportunities. The most significant investment we had was in our Minam wildlife area. So this was an investment that was catalyzed by our partners, and we were able to use federal funds from the USDA Forest Legacy program and partner funding to acquire a significant area there. And those benefits include, again, habitat connectivity, recreation, winter range protection, and tie to the work of fish, wildlife, and habitat divisions. And then another investment was in our Coquille Valley Wildlife Area in Southwest Oregon. So we got an additional position there to help support restoration, access, and working lands at that wildlife area. Another area that we wanted to highlight is that we've put an emphasis this biennium on implementation of our Oregon Conservation Strategy, which is our state wildlife action plan. So our staff have been really creative in finding funding for these wildlife diversity efforts to leverage the somewhat limited capacity that we have now. So we've secured funding from numerous funding sources, and I included the entire alphabet up there. The Oregon Conservation and Recreation Fund, Good Neighbor Authority, Pittman-Robertson funds, Fish and Wildlife Service Section 6 grants, and competitive state wildlife grants, as well as the Oregon Wildlife Foundation. And those projects that have been funded that way target a lot of our priority species, and I've listed several up there, but across a variety of taxa, and really improving our understanding of those species. So this work will inform the current revision to our state wildlife action plan that's going on right now, and will also support our goal of healthy populations so we can avoid listings in the future. And then, as Shannon mentioned, we wanted to highlight some of the additional funding and investments that were made during the 2024 short session. And again, this is the result of a lot of work by our partners, some of them in this room. So the first is our agency received about $800,000 in general fund for our wildlife health lab to increase surveillance and sampling collection for chronic wasting disease. And then while not directly to our budget, the OSU Veterinary Diagnostic Lab received almost $2 million to help them increase their capacity, including that for in-state CWD testing. And then the second item there is also not into our budget, but the legislature did support over $1 million in general fund for invasive species prevention through the Oregon Invasive Species Council. And that includes funding for support of the council, education, outreach, and also an emergency fund for invasive species response. So with that, I will turn it to Sarah.
Thanks, Bernadette. Hi, everybody. Sarah Reif, Habitat Division Administrator. It's good to see the folks in the room, and I can't see you, but hopefully you can see me, and hello to everyone online. So very proud to provide these updates of what we've been doing this biennium. Thanks to the support from our stakeholders. In the 23-25 biennium, the Habitat Division saw further investment in our water program and great support for our grant programs that deliver conservation dollars to our partners on the ground. We received roughly $1.3 million in general fund to support the agency's high priority work being done by our water program. These investments are helping us continue our efforts to secure in-stream water protections for fish and wildlife, bolster our science program's work on stream temperature monitoring, and expand our participation in stakeholder-driven water planning efforts around the state. We also received an additional $10 million in general fund for the Private Forest Accord grant program, bringing the PFA grant fund total up to around $22 million. We're excited to report that in just this biennium alone, we not only established this new grant program and the advisory committee, but we are just weeks away from announcing the recipients of roughly $10 million in funding for our first solicitation. And we'll be delivering much needed funds to projects on the ground all around the state that are shovel ready and could really move the conservation needle for Oregon's fish, amphibians, and watersheds. We were also very pleased to receive funding for the Oregon Conservation and Recreation Fund this biennium, including the $5 million in lottery bond funds that the sale that was approved with that Bernadette referred to in her remarks, as well as an additional $1 million in funds to go toward drought and climate resiliency related projects. That $1 million in drought funds adds to a $4 million investment into OCRF for drought-related projects that we received in 2022. And through this program, we deliver grant funding to our partners who are working on Oregon species and habitats of greatest conservation need, and really leading the state in engaging Oregon's diverse and underserved people and communities with the outdoors. The OCRF at this point is funded, I think it's somewhere around 140 projects. Each solicitation at this point, we're delivering about $1 million each time. So we're very proud of that work that we do, and we are so grateful for our volunteers on that committee. As Shannon and Bernadette mentioned, I'll highlight some of our investments that we received in the 2024 session. Further investments were made into Habitat Division's work, and they're really helping us bring a new focus on climate resiliency and on landscape scale restoration. Working in partnership with our sister natural resource agencies at OWEB, Department of Agriculture, Department of Forestry, we brought forward a comprehensive natural climate solutions package to the Oregon Climate Action Commission that proposed a diverse set of projects designed to sequester carbon and restore habitat on natural and working lands. This biennium, through that proposal, we were awarded $2.4 million. And with those funds, we are leveraging significant federal infrastructure and Inflation Reduction Act bill funds. And we're very excited to be implementing several projects, including estuary restoration in the Umpqua and Tillamook basins, oak woodland restoration, working with the Confederated Tribes of the Warm Springs, native bunchgrass restoration in Wasco County, floodplain restoration with the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde. And we're very pleased to receive authority for 2 positions that are going to really help coordinate this work, leverage additional federal dollars, and also help practitioners put that new carbon sequestration lens on the habitat restoration work that they do. In the 2024 session, we also saw legislature approve Senate Bill 1561, which establishes a structure for allocating interest earned on the Monsanto settlement funds and creates the Oregon Environmental Restoration Council. The bill provided a position to ODFW to help support OWEB and the new council as they stand up their metrics, priorities, and rules for the use of the funds. We're also very proud to have worked with our partners to bring in more than $4.5 million so far in federal funding from various programs, including the once-in-a-lifetime opportunities like the bipartisan infrastructure legislation and the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, to support habitat restoration and climate resiliency work throughout the state. So again, a long list of just really amazing habitat restoration work that I can rattle off for you, including oak woodland restoration in the Klamath-Siskiyou system, more work in our coastal estuaries, some beaver modified landscapes work, as well as notably our Good Neighbor Authority program, which helps supports habitat restoration work on federal lands in partnership with the Forest Service and the BLM. We have been able to bring in almost $2 million through that program this biennium alone. And really, I would say the key to the successes in all of these fronts has been the strong partnerships that we build and maintain with land managers, landowners, tribes, state, local, federal agencies, with you all, with our conservation organizations and partners at local, state, and regional scales. And so the successes that I report here are really all of your successes as well, and really belong to a lot of people. With that, I'll hand it over to Mike.
All right. Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, I introduced myself a little earlier. I'm Mike Harrington. I'm the Fish Division Administrator. And I'm going to start off with some highlights, much like Bernadette and Sarah did. But before I get into that, I really want to make it clear that this is also a celebration of a lot of the work that you have done, making this work possible, working with federal legislators and state legislators to secure a lot of this funding. As Sarah mentioned, the importance of providing access to quality habitat to improve species resiliency and resiliency to climate change is really critical. And over the last few years, we've seen unprecedented investments in improving fish passage at both the state and federal level. In 2023, 2025, the state legislature doubled down on investments made during 2022 by providing $8.75 million in lottery bonds that will become available to us early next year, as well as 1 FTE to work in our fish passage program. Both of these investments are really critical in developing projects and leveraging federal funding. Added to that, this biennium, the department, working with partners, has secured over $79 million that are being used to address barriers to fish passage throughout Oregon. This outcome together, we've been able to open up access to hundreds of miles of habitat, which is the fastest way to increase productivity of populations and provide them access to cold water refugia. Moving on over to some highlights from our hatchery program. In 2023, the legislator allocated $1 million to ODFW to work with third parties to answer questions about the vulnerabilities in some of our hatcheries and ongoing sustainability of our hatchery system, which will help us examine how we can adapt for the future given all the challenges that our hatchery system is facing in terms of rising costs, climate change, and deferred maintenance. To address that deferred maintenance, we've been fortunate on the federal side to have significant investments in the Columbia Basin through the Mitchell Act, and we've seen $14.5 million in investments there. And then again, working with Senator Merkley and a lot of you folks in the room, or I guess online, we've been able to secure $8 million for Coal River, and those investments will be really critical to securing power and water supply at these facilities. And then moving over to some 2024 session adjustments here, Klamath Dam removal. There were some pretty significant investments in 2024, one of them being the dam removals, where we were fortunate enough to secure 1.7 FTEs, which will allow us to really be able to monitor the recolonization of coho, steelhead, and fall chinook, and also with the reintroduction of spring chinook, and a lot of other really important work with that historic project. And then on to marine reserves, we got 3 FTE for an ecologist, an economist, and a community engagement specialist, and an additional $415,000 to develop an adaptive management plan, which is really an investment in ocean resiliency and fisheries resiliency. And with that, I'm passing it back on to, I believe, Shannon.
Shifted on you. We're digging into the 25-27 budget. Again, it's really kind of important to start with the 23-25 because we take that legislatively adopted budget, we look at what was permanent, and that becomes our current service level budget when we start developing an agency request budget. But before we do that, we look for continuity here, and these principles have been with us through several biennia. Looking about how we actually go about this consistently each time. And one thing we're always looking for is to continually assess and improve our programs, look at where we have data gaps, where we have needs, where our partners are telling us we need more attention. We're definitely using that throughout our budget process. We ensure that we have the resources to meet our mission focus, don't see mission creep, stay on this important focus for healthy fish, wildlife, and habitat. We also are looking to develop a sustainable budget, and we're going to talk about that and more. When you have a lot of fund types, that's an asset, but it also, you're always dealing with a fund type that seems to be shrinking as well. And then we strive to be sensitive to price cost to our customers. Fish revenue, we're here to serve a customer base that comes to us for a product, and we're also here to serve all Oregonians, and that's always trying to find a balance in those two efforts. And then we also want to provide transparency as we develop our budget. That's why we're here today. That's the important part of these meetings. And I think, we do this every other year. That's when all the other 4 efforts come together under this transparency model. I've snuck in this graph a few times. It hasn't changed much. What we did was we took the very detailed budget timeline of where we have to provide products to DAS over about 6 months. And then we looked at what public engagement means. And I summarized that all here down. So we're here April 4th for our first kickoff meeting. And we've done a lot of work to get here, but we also have a long stretch of development period here that we have to do in a very short amount of time. And we always feel like we're behind in this. But I'll talk about the difference of this year in a bit, and more so than any other year, we're feeling like we're a little bit behind. And I know I mentioned that because a lot of our stakeholders have referenced, man, it just seems like we're already into April and we're not seeing much. So we're getting moving here. We'll share materials today. Our ultimate goal here is to have a budget ready that the Fish and Wildlife Commission can adopt or approve before we turn it into DAS. And we're one of the few agencies that in statute has that requirement. But of course, we'd want to engage our commissions or boards and budget development anyway. So we'll give them the most recent update, April 19th. I do a financial report. I kind of give a summary of current budget status, and then I give them a better update on what we're planning as we move along. And then the next meeting that we want to engage the public at is May 16th. Now, this is an open public period, so there are the email to odfw.commission where you can send stuff. We have the open comments and questions link now. We're going to be replacing that with specific questions that we were hoping people will send in responses specific to our budget. And then we'll close down this public engagement period to start getting ready for the June 14th meeting. That meeting, they will also take public testimony at. You can send it in ahead of time or you can sign up to testify there. And it's all geared at what I said before about garnering support and an understanding of where the public is on our budget. The crucial deadline here is that August 30th, we have to turn in a budget. That deadline is not flexible. There is a lot of work that staff have to do, thanks budget and economics program, to build all this position by position, fund type by fund type, program by program into a budget system. And then we, of course, turn that into DAS. The governor's recommended budget, and I just saw this in the budget instructions, is confirmed to come out on December 1st. And then all agencies' budgets will go through the legislative process in 2025. I summarized here for you 64 pages of budget instructions that we get from DAS. I even summarized it out of their executive summary. What we're hearing overall for budget instructions is really we need to transition, be aware as agencies to transition out of this significant programmatic one-time investment period, whether it's federal fund or maybe you receive some state funds. And you need to be starting to think about a sustainable level without those continued injections into budgets. No one can really predict overall things like pandemics, government shutdowns, those kind of things that impact budgets. So they're basically saying prepare for a sustainable level of funding as if more money will not be coming. There's some great guidance in there about focusing on your core priorities, our mission, improving your agency functions. There's governor's priorities that are really looking at enhancing customer service and agency resiliency. They want us focused on our strategic plans and our strategic initiatives. And then the guidance says to leverage where you have already been strategic in gaining ground, especially around climate change impacts. And that's in the governor's priorities if you look further in that document. Oops, sorry, jumped ahead too fast. All of this to say, we take this advice, we kind of put it through a filter, and that's where we start building our agency request budget out. So Debbie's going to come up next. She'll talk about what that means as far as us for focal areas around investments. And the only other thing I want to highlight, and I know for some of you who've been involved in budgets, you don't need this. We're going to talk about policy option packages next. And we always call them POPs and refer to it and forget. People have no idea what that means and can't tie it to investments. That is your real way when you're building your agency request budget. You take current service level and you add investments, and then you add a reduction exercise, and that becomes your agency request budget. So then the next round, we always get most comment on where people would like to see us make new investments, but we have to keep this all in mind as we're developing those, because it is a cost-constrained environment based on those instructions. Debbie?
All right. Again, I'm Debbie Colbert, and I'm the Deputy Director for Fish and Wildlife Programs here at ODFW. And just in case you have not heard the message of thank you enough as we transition, I think you'll all agree there's just so much to celebrate over the last, 3-4 years in terms of these amazing investments that we've seen into the agency. And, for us, that really is the starting place as we think about the next 2 years. So I want to tell you a little bit about how we're approaching that. But before I do, I want to give a shout out for our Commissioner Leslie King for joining us here today as a volunteer commissioner and being here in the room and very heavily engaged in our budget. So thank you, Commissioner King. So you know that we have been involved in a little bit of a different process, as Shannon mentioned, with the governor's office. What we can tell you about today in terms of the investments that we're going to be looking for in this budget are things that we've talked to the governor's office about so far, but recognizing that there's a lot of conversations that will still be happening over the next 8 months before the governor ultimately develops the budget that she submits to the legislature. So all that said, we wanted to give you a little bit of context about how we've organized the investments that we're going to be pursuing. And you're going to hear from the Fish, Wildlife, and Habitat divisions more about those specific investments next. But what you're going to see is basically a combination of really trying to hold on to the progress and the gains that we've seen to date in terms of our general fund. Also trying to continue to focus our efforts with an eye toward climate and how we can make meaningful impact on a landscape scale. So you're also really going to only hear today about our lottery fund, general fund, and investment packages. We wanted to start there with you. We'll have more time to share information about federal funded and other efforts, but you're really going to hear from the divisions about their general fund. And then we're also going to tee up a little bit of a conversation to give you a feel for what we're looking at in terms of our license funded programs. So that's kind of what the divisions are going to be sharing with you. You all know that our mission is very much centered on species resiliency. And I've said this to our commission in a number of venues. We have a sense of urgency on this front. And as you're going to hear from the divisions, we have a number of new investments that we're going to be focusing on ensuring and supporting species resiliency in the face of changing climate and land and energy development. We've also been taking stock of how we manage effectively in the face of increasing complexity. I don't think that it's going to come as a surprise to anybody who's watching this or in the room today that what we do as a department is not getting easier. In fact, it's getting more and more complicated in terms of kind of some of the forces that are acting on species, some of the expectations that our partners have on us. And really kind of the level at which our science and our data systems are set up and the speed at which we can make decisions. And so we're really taking stock of what is it going to take for us to manage effectively in the face of that increasing complexity. And then lastly, we have to consider our agency operations and how we're configured and how our resources are set up to deliver good customer service, to continue to be accountable to the folks that pay for the work that we do as an agency, and to make sure that we are serving the diverse population of Oregon. So I also want to say, you see the timeline that Shannon shared about kind of these events. We anticipate having a number of conversations with you as we are preparing the budget. So these are kind of, just making sure that everybody that wants to know what's happening has a chance. But I also want to assure you that there will be ample opportunity for us to be talking to you about kind of what's important and, how we frame some of the investments that we're going to be pursuing with our budget. So while we know that, and I think Shannon's going to share a little bit more, it's a little bit of a mixed bag on kind of the state's outlook on funding, and also a mixed bag on what we're hearing in terms of our instructions for new general fund. We're still going to try and be pretty ambitious, and I think that's what you're going to see in the series of asks. And while we may not end up being successful in getting general fund for everything that we're looking for, I do think that there is an opportunity for us to be thinking about, if it's not general fund, what is it going to be? We have spent decades talking about the need for sustained alternative funding, and I really do think that we have a window of opportunity to be talking to our governor's office, to our commissioners, and others. So I think more to come on that front, but I'm very optimistic. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Bernadette.
Thanks, Debbie. So I wanted to highlight several of the general fund investments that we're pursuing in Wildlife Division. So with the increasing threats of a changing climate and disease, we're looking for additional investments to support some of our work towards resilient populations. So that includes a request to expand our capacity for wildlife diversity work. This includes funding for 2 additional field positions and a herpetologist position, recognizing the disproportionate impacts that climate change, drought, and development have on amphibians and reptiles. And as I've mentioned previously, we've been creative in finding funding for this work, but additional capacity will help us just leverage more of those opportunities and put more work on the ground in understanding some of these species for which we have limited data. The second area is that we're interested in continuing our work with surveillance and monitoring for chronic wasting disease. CWD is one of the most important diseases threatening North American deer and elk, and it's approaching us rapidly. We know that Idaho is currently addressing CWD just across our border, and we're trying to be as prepared as possible as this threat approaches and when it's detected in Oregon. So this request will build our capacity to sample, test, and respond in a timely manner. And then in the category of the increasing complexity of our work as human populations respond and we have more growth and development, we have increased interactions with wildlife. And this includes conflicts in both urban and rural areas. So the wildlife coexistence investment would provide capacity to help address that human-wildlife conflict. And it would include targeted outreach to the public on how to interact with wildlife and what an appropriate response should be. And it also includes funding for our wildlife rehabilitators who provide a really important service, but don't currently receive any state funding. And then finally, as the department has committed to focus our wolf plan implementation in 3 areas, those include reducing wolf livestock conflict and also improving our data collection and monitoring. This last investment would increase our capacity with an additional wolf biologist located in areas of expanding wolf populations, and would also provide funding to wildlife services to increase our overall capacity for addressing conflict and reducing that conflict. So those are the general fund investments that Wildlife Division is pursuing, and I will turn it to Sarah.
Thanks, Bernadette. Appreciate it. Okay, so for Habitat Division, in terms of general fund investment proposals for the 25-27, in Oregon, we know that species resiliency in the face of a changing climate will depend on access to suitable habitat, right? You've heard that as kind of a repeating theme today. But at the same time, development of renewable energy, urbanization, increased recreation pressure on our public lands is all happening at a pretty unprecedented pace in the state, and further shrinking that available habitat for fish and wildlife. Habitat Division's perspective on this is a yes and perspective. How do we do both? How do we support the state's development goals while also maintaining healthy fish and wildlife populations? How do we ensure the best possible outcome for fish, wildlife, and people? And so in order to do that, ODFW has to be at the table. We have to have those resources to engage in land and energy planning, in regulatory reviews, smart siting tools for energy development, and engaging landowners in voluntary restoration in some of the key geographies around the state. As Debbie mentioned, we're well on our way with some of that work, lots to celebrate from 23-25. And so for Habitat Division in particular, it's really kind of about sustaining those existing investments. One of the things that we did last go around is we tried to establish a regional habitat biologist in each of our watershed districts. We didn't quite make it to each and all of them. And so with this proposal, it's really kind of rounding out that original vision and requesting 3 FTE so that we can be sure we have a habitat biologist in every watershed. And they can engage on the full range of all of those policy discussions, the regulatory reviews, and also really building that capacity for restoration work with landowners and land managers around the state. We'll also be recommending continued sufficient resources to respond to protests and legal challenges of in-stream water right filings and land use energy cases where those habitat mitigation standards are being tested. It's really, really part of the work. For 25-27, we're also really excited to continue to prioritize large-scale habitat restoration efforts that enhance resiliency and really try to create a conservation benefit for fish and wildlife throughout the state. In addition to our existing programs, we're going to continue to elevate the importance of the Private Forest Accord grant program. The package would ensure the state fulfills its commitment to implementing the Private Forest Accord by fully funding the grant program alongside the timber harvest revenue that already goes into the PFA fund. This grant program, as I mentioned, it really provides that necessary funding for aquatic habitat in key geographies while balancing ongoing timber harvest. And the request would also be for permanent appropriation. We'll also be seeking expenditure limitation for the investments I mentioned before that we received from the Oregon Climate Action Commission for our natural climate solutions projects. This will allow us to really work through the implementation and completion of those projects that were awarded to us in the 2024 session. And, even with all this amazing work we've been able to accomplish in the last few years, it's important to remember that the Habitat Division is still new. Habitat Division was just established in the 2021-23 legislatively adopted budget, largely as a realignment of existing programs and positions coming from the Fish and Wildlife divisions, and with a number of positions that are located out in the regional field offices. With that establishment came some key new investments in division administration and in the water program and in field positions, but it was really largely just sort of a reorg. Since then, though, and based on support from stakeholders and all of you, legislature made significant additional investments into the division through the Private Forest Accord in 2022, the Comprehensive Drought Package in 2022, the OCRF dedicated funds, and in other areas. And these critical investments they've really been welcome additions. They've really been a good fit with Habitat Division's purpose and role. However, the increased budget and program complexity has underscored the need for core operations and budget management within the division, really consistent with what's already found in the Fish and Wildlife divisions. For example, Habitat Division's budget today is 4 times the size it was when we were established in 2021. So for this reason, we're recommending just 1 FTE to help us ensure efficient and accurate business operations, again, mimicking the existing positions that are already in the other divisions. And lastly, we will continue to elevate the work of the OCRF, the Oregon Conservation and Recreation Fund. Not only is this program valuable for its conservation work that it supports through the grants, but OCRF really is leading the way in Oregon in its efforts to expand and diversify Oregon's outdoor users, and is really calling in minority and underserved communities to make that connection to nature and to feel like they're contributing to conservation in Oregon. OCRF has seen a number of project and topic-specific investments in the last several years. And so this request this time around is for a reinvestment in that broad purpose and mission of engaging Oregonians in conservation and outdoor recreation. And we really view this investment as an opportunity to carry on the state's ability to leverage private donation dollars to go toward conservation as well. So I will pass it back to Mike.
Again, Sarah. All right, so time for some fish pops. So building on the theme of managing through complexity, we have two statewide pops that we're going to talk about here. The first is centered around data management and salmon and steelhead research. As populations become more depressed and fluctuate more rapidly, we're finding that data and data management are increasingly important to maintain opportunities and guide restoration. And we currently lack a centralized data system to readily access that data. And we've found that it can take years sometimes to pull together information we need for some of our planning efforts. And this timescale just doesn't work. So given the pace of change today and without timely access to our data, our ability to continue to providing opportunity is going to start to suffer. Similarly, we currently don't have research capacity to address the data gaps for salmon and steelhead. And as climate change impacts these populations, it becomes more important than ever to fill those gaps so we can make the right decisions. The second area is in our hatchery system. So our hatchery system continues to face challenges from aging infrastructure, rising costs, and climate change. These issues are impacting our ability to maintain hatchery programs. And to address this, the department is taking a thorough look at the system with the goal of developing an infrastructure blueprint for a sustainable system, and aided by recent legislative investments. So we're proposing a capital bond to implement the first phase of that blueprint. Additionally, to address the higher than average inflationary impacts, we're proposing an adjustment to the general fund service and supplies. Slide here. All right, it worked. So on to some investments that we're working towards in the regions. The first one is a coastal investment. And we lost some notes here, but the first one is a coastal investment, and that's with wind energy and siting analysis. That's for 1 FTE to ensure we have the capacity to protect marine resources and fisheries as some of these offshore wind projects are developed in Oregon. The second one, as we move east out to the East region, is an assistant fish biologist. Over the last really several biennia, through some of our budget struggles in the past, we've created some budget efficiencies by removing a couple of our assistant fish bios out there. And this is an attempt to get that capacity back, especially as we start to see increasing populations and increased use and demands on our resources in the East region. Also is with the Klamath reintroduction. We have three positions. One is to ensure that we can fully. So this is with Klamath reintroduction. One of those is to ensure that ODFW can fully monitor the recolonization of anadromous fish and the reintroduction of spring Chinook. We're going to need some money to help fund production of those spring Chinook for the reintroduction, and just the overall capacity to provide some screening as those fish are entering new areas so that they're not ending out on ranchers' fields and in farm fields through irrigation canals. And then last is a Klamath District watershed manager. You can see that bottom, really 3/4 of the state. I believe it's 30% of the state or 30% of the East region. It's a really large area. It's covered by one watershed manager and 4 districts. And as we start to see increased development, mining, Klamath Dam reintroductions, wolf issues, all of those issues, that we really need some capacity to manage those programs. And so that's an ask for, I think, 358 and 1 FTE there. And I will now pass it on back to, I believe, Shannon.
Thank Mike now. I tried not to schedule this during spring break, but I didn't get every school. So Mike came back from spring vacation and it was like, here's your slides. We do have some what we call administrative general fund POPs requests, where we can make the argument that this is a broad enough ask across the state, really serving our customers. We asked for general fund type for these POPs. So we've been very successful in putting in general fund obligation bond asks to address our deferred maintenance and facility enhancements, like I mentioned. We have a team, a facilities management team. They work with our engineers to really assess, okay, what's the next one on the list? So the next one on the list for us is the Rogue Watershed District Office in Central Point. This would be a $5 million general fund bond and then a $250,000 debt service ask. And the engineers are saying, you know, it's old enough that it's really not a remodel, it's a replacement. So we're planning for that. The other one on this list is the uptick that we're seeing on our wildlife areas and hatcheries and other state managed properties of people dumping refuse. That's actually not new, but there is an increase on it. But what is new is RVs and motorhomes being abandoned and left there. So there's a general fund ask so that we can support regions who are really putting in the requests. And they're saying, you know, not all of these wildlife areas and hatcheries have in their budget to do this expensive removal at our cost. The other two on the administrative side, we think we can make a pretty good pitch. Our public records serves customers across Oregon, right? You can, any agency, you can submit a formal public records request. What we have seen is really an increase in volume, but more so an increase in complexity of digging into a lot of different information. And we are, like many agencies, we have a wealth of information. We also have a wealth of staff and offices that this needs to be coordinated across. So an analyst dedicated towards that could ensure that we're meeting those statutory deadlines and the timeliness of it. And then they could look at our retention of records, coordinate that policy. And also we do want to invest in a better tracking and reporting system for public records here in the near future, and they could lead that. And then we have two positions in the next POP. One's a DI coordinator and one's a language specialist. We have tried this in previous biennia. We think we make a pretty good argument for the general fund ask. The DEI coordinator, we have a DEI committee. We have many staff that serve as ambassadors, and this is a focus, but we have the space of Oregon, and you're trying to run diversity, equity, inclusion concepts, both internally and externally for your customers. We think a coordinator would be really good to give that emphasis and really maintain the consistency in the efforts that we're trying to put on the ground. And then we have no positions in the agency that have bilingual translation or multilingual translation. I mean, multilingual would be nice. I'll take bilingual though. Or can do interpretation. And those are two different skill sets. What we do now is we contract for it based on the ask. We are wanting to follow DAS's rules about translating a bunch of our materials, especially into Spanish. But we don't have those resources yet. The other thing that we found through the work that we've done is that if you're really going to meet the requirements to go out and serve better underserved or underrepresented communities, a lot of times you need to go to them. So having a coordinator who can do that on a dedicated, in a dedicated way in Spanish would be fantastic for this agency. Okay, we are at almost an hour. We've got about 11 slides left. And we're going to switch topics here. So since we only have 5 of you in the room, push on through, take a brief break. King says push. Commissioner King, I don't often hear that during the commission meetings. Okay, I heard push. Yeah. Well, I understand why. Those are long meetings. Okay. Again, switching topics here. So please don't focus on the slide for a second here, because I need to set the stage for you. Mike, you were already following the advice. Thank you. So we're shifting to a different fund type, and I need to lay the groundwork for you here on why that matters and why we're doing that, and why these lines are on there. So as I mentioned previously, the basis for the North American model of wildlife conservation is set up so state agencies can fund fish and wildlife management with recreational and commercial license revenue. Oregon is fortunate, again, not to be one of the states wholly dependent on that. But other sources require contracts and agreements, and that is dedicated funding. So that gets locked up for a sole purpose, and you cannot build operating reserves from that money. So a lot of times I'll report that, in our bank accounts, we have this much ending balance. That combines that dedicated and then that non-dedicated funds into one. But if you're really going to have operating reserves, it can't be dedicated to a purpose. And the other thing I need folks to know is our agency fee structure, the cost of license tags and permits is in statute. I've been here for 24 years. I can't tell you how many people I've answered that question for. There's really a belief out there that our commission can just change the prices of things, and they can't. You have to run a fee structure bill in addition to your agency budget bill. And so when fees are done, we have a governor introduce a bill that can only be done during the odd years, during long session. And then even then, that fee structure will have dedicated amounts in it, right? So we have surcharges on it. I'll use the angling license surcharge for fish passage. It says in statute it can only be used for that purpose. So that's swept out of that licensed non-dedicated fund, and it remains there in that account for that purpose and can't be used for operating reserves. The last fee bill that we ran as an agency was in 2015. And we had amazing support from partners, and that continued as we implemented that fee structure change. It was a 6-year fee increase from 2016 to 2020, and it was implemented in 2-year increments. So the last increase in fees we saw was in 2020. The agency reviewed in 2021 and 2023 where we were at with operating reserves and the solvency of license funded programs and positions. And we did not pursue a fee increase during those 2 sessions, right? And part of a fee package when you run it is always this consideration about efficiencies. And it's this consideration of where you want to be with your operating reserves. We have set our target, looking back at the slide, at 3 months operating reserve. So right now it's costing us about $16 million a month to pay the bills. So that's $49.5 million when you total that up. And so what we've laid out here for you is if you look at the blue line with circles, that's our expenditures. And if you look at the revenue, we're starting to see a gap, right? Not unexpected. And we'll talk about cost drivers in a second here. The reason the line in the center is there is 21-23, we have good numbers. So we can say, yep, that's exactly where we hit with revenue, and that's exactly where we hit with expenditures. We are projecting out for 23-25 what that future looks like, and that's where we're starting to see this gap. And then we're doing a pretty simple calculation to just look at that green line with the triangles, which is our ending balance, but this is really getting towards what we have for operating reserves in there in the non-dedicated amount. And so we're projecting by 2020, the end of 23-25, the end of this biennium, we will be dipping below that 3 month. And then if you go further out with no fee adjustment in license revenue, again, it's talking about license revenue, we're starting to really eat into operating reserves in some programs more than others, because not all programs are funded the same. And then if you project out further with 27-29, you're below the 0 line, and you've really got to start cutting programs to maintain your agency. And no one really wants to get there. I understand that. A lot of times when I do the financial report, I will share what our ending balance looks like just so people can understand the volatility in it. And trying to manage across 4 fund types and the changes in budget and the surprises that you get, that creates that volatility. We actually backfill a lot of federal money. I mentioned that one early. We hold a lot, and we use this operating reserves to pay ourselves while we're waiting for reimbursement. And that's why operating reserves is so critical. I provided you this slide. No one in this room does not know what this slide means. You're really seeing this at home in your budgets. Rising healthcare costs, cost of living adjustments, the price of everything is up. And then I just use it to talk about that volatility in inflation and how hard this is to predict. You can see predicting out on the left side well, the best economists in the nation are predicting that we're going to flatline. That's really interesting because we haven't done that yet in the last couple of years. But again, this personal growth one, that's the one we can really count on that stays this steady trend in the projection. And projections make all of us budget managers nervous. It's our best effort here of trying to predict the future. I put in this graph specifically because I told you we dig into license specifically, and I wanted to show you how this works. So I mentioned in 2020 was the last time we went for a fee revenue adjustment. So that's the bump up there in the blue bar graph. And then we've held pretty consistent in revenue as we've looked at these projections in 21 and 23, deciding if we needed a fee adjustment. And I don't think anyone would make the argument you really did at that point. But we've also done cost containment. We've really tried to stay at a level where these license fund programs are not adding significant numbers of positions and putting pressure on that. And we hit a really nice spot. We're very proud as an agency that we did so well with the fee increase. We've lasted so long in license revenue and maintaining our license funded programs in this way. Oh, must not be ready to turn it over yet. Yep, I have one more point. Sorry, Bernadette. It's a critical one, I promise. I want to highlight real quick before I turn it over to Bernadette how much these license dollars mean to Oregon. And you're going to see this in Mike's presentation as well. So this is our main revenue source that we can and do leverage for federal resources, right? These non-dedicated funds that can be put up to match things like Pittman-Robertson, Dingell-Johnson. And just about every contract or agreement that we have requires state match. This and volunteerism in Oregon is what brings in federal funding to do good fish and wildlife management on a landscape scale that many species benefit from. So many of our programs are a blend of funding, not only for the match, but because we use that general fund, federal fund, and license revenue to sustain the efforts when we have that volatility in available state and federal funding. It kind of smooths it out just a bit. And I'll turn it over to you now, Bernadette.
So in our wildlife division, our license funds support most of our wildlife management programs, and that includes all or part of our field staff, our field wildlife biologists, as well as our wildlife research programs and our wildlife areas. As Shannon mentioned, sometimes that's full funding, but sometimes that's in combination with general fund or federal fund. So this funding primarily goes to support the positions that we have, and that includes the services that they provide to our public. So over time, we've seen personal services and overall costs of the programs continue to increase, and we've been absorbing that within our current license allocation. So other costs have also increased. In addition to personal services, those include Department of Justice support, wildlife services support, and other aspects that are just really related to the complexity of the management. And so since our last fee increase, as Shannon mentioned, we haven't added any new programs on licensed dollars, but we have used some licensed dollars to match PR bump so we can take advantage of those opportunities when they're there. So over time, the availability of licensed dollars will impact not only our positions, which most of that funding goes to, but also our ability to take advantage of some of those PR opportunities. And with that, I will turn it to Mike.
All right. So I'm going to build a little bit on some of what Bernadette just discussed. She mentioned wildlife is seeing some challenges in the coming years potentially, and in fish division, we're already seeing some of those challenges. And that's because managing fish in a coastal state with really diverse geographies is really complex. You have coast, you have anadromous species that are many of them listed. And so when you start getting into that complexity, it takes a lot of staff. And the slide is a little complicated. There's a lot going on over here. So you'll see over here on the left, there's 721 FTE. And then over on the right, you'll see it says monitoring, research, hatcheries, and recovery actions. And next to those, there are these dots, and they have FF, LIC, and GF. Those are different funding types: federal funding, licensed, general funding. And so you can start to see some of the complexity right off the bat that's going into managing this program. Because many of our wild game fish are listed, we have to invest pretty heavily in monitoring and research and recovery actions. And so monitoring and research are required to understand the limiting factors and the impacts of fisheries so we can continue to provide fishing opportunities back to the license holder. Additionally, we have to sustain fish populations in somewhat of what's turning into an unnatural world where migratory populations are blocked by dams, habitats heavily altered. We have invasive species that are predating on native species. We also have to meet tribal treaty obligations and augment fisheries when wild fish runs can't sustain the demand anymore. And not only that, but there's pretty heavy demand for trout opportunities in ponds and reservoirs. And all of this, in the light of climate change, it requires hatcheries. And so a lot of funding mechanisms go into that, and it's very complex. And then last, we need staff that are actively engaged in implementing recovery actions so that we can continue to maintain these fishing opportunities. So overall, we have to be able to operate and support these other funding sources and projects within our license fund budget over the last decade. However, there's been a lot of pressure on that budget. And with all of this in mind, I want to talk to you a little bit more about some of those pressures that are on our budget and that affect these three activities. So I'll switch slides over here. And the three pressures that I'm going to talk about are DOJ expenses, flat federal funding, and rising costs at our hatcheries. So the increases in DOJ expenses are really caused by a pretty significant increase in litigation that we've seen, increased need for contract review for our hatcheries to engage in repair and of deferred maintenance issues, and for those large sums of federal funding that you're seeing us bring in, and also negotiating settlements. And as with most other things in life, DOJ rates have increased significantly over the last 20 years, and our current projected DOJ costs for this biennium are $1.2 million, where historically we may have seen at most about $300,000 a biennium. The second issue that I mentioned was flat federal funding. We received federal funding from the Bonneville Power Administration, Sportfish Restoration, USV Oregon, and the Pacific Salmon Coastal Restoration Fund. However, these funds provide a lot of coverage for our programs that are essential to angler opportunity and including hatcheries and monitoring, but they've been flat funding and declining for many years. And so initially we were using license fund to backfill some of these, but we've just gotten to a point where we can no longer do that, which is with the other demands that we have to meet. And so instead of backfilling, we're now starting to eliminate that program. And the last that I want to talk about is just the rising cost of hatcheries. We've talked a little bit about this previously, but for some examples, we're seeing a 20% increase in the cost of fish food. And that's due to reduced global supply and increased global demand, which our sources expect to increase with demands for fish oils in new markets like health supplements, things like that, and just dwindling supplies. Also, you're probably reading about this in the news, or you've just experienced it in your utility bills. I know I sure have. The cost of utilities are increasing, and a lot of that's due to, the fires and their need to improve infrastructure to reduce that fire risk. And they're passing those costs along to the consumers. So we've seen pretty significant increases. I think one of the numbers I saw was a 17% increase in power fees. And then last, I guess the last thing I want to talk about there is, we have filed for budget exceptions on DOJ expenses and some of the inflationary expenses we've seen at our hatcheries, and we're taking other steps across all three of these to try to minimize the pressures, but they're really not going to be enough to fill the gap over the next several years. And so right now we have to start talking about how we're going to fill that gap with either reductions of program, or is it time to consider things like fee increases? So with that, I will pass it on back to Shannon.
All right, set the stage for this one again. Like I mentioned, where we can make the case for administrative positions, we will thrive, with other fund types, general fund being the other one. So if you look at administrative budgets in our 4 divisions, we're really general fund, license fund, and indirect rate. And indirect rate comes from those contracts and agreements I mentioned, like the federal government is. Well, we always negotiated. I was going to say 30%, but we're down at 25%. So we're at 25% indirect on all these contracts. So that's helped build our portfolio. But what we're proposing here for these 3 pots is a license indirect rate, a license fund policy option package for these. The first one is a continuation of our website design. This really gets at what is a phase 2 of looking at this 91,000 page website that we have going on. We've completed the audit. We're still in the place of trying to hire positions and capacity to put on to do this work, but we've definitely getting started this biennium. And then the next step is really finalizing the audit and then starting to do an audience analysis. Who's using our web? What are they coming for? What are they looking for? How can we best serve them? And then once you finish the audit, there's an internal customer look too. What do our divisions need to provide out there? What's information? Do you build a blog? Those kind of things. And then you start building soon after that. And then we additionally have a policy option package in for a payroll analyst. I'm hearing a lot of agencies are doing this. We implemented Workday recently. There's a lot of staff questions and response, and making sure that their payments are accurate and they could use additional support in that program for that. And then last but not least, we have a budget analyst in this policy option package portfolio, looking at use of license fund to really add capacity to what we've described here. We're seeing increasing different funding streams. Increasingly, we're seeing shifts in funding availability. We're trying to manage real-time budgets and scenarios for shortfalls. And then I'll briefly share around revenue. We have looked at the volatility in license sales. We have economists that can do that analysis, and our economists have analyzed a lot of things relating to purchasing. And this helps us with this price point setting. And we see an increase in license sales when there's good weather, when there's a reduced fire impact on the landscape that you can predict, good fishery return forecasts. And we do see a decline relative when gas prices go way up or mortgages are high and people aren't having as much expendable income. But the pandemic really highlighted for us, for a lot of these volitional license purchases that drive this revenue, it is about time and what time you're competing against to do with your family. So I just wanted to highlight what we are seeing. We saw a bump during the pandemic. We are starting to see this trend back into pre-pandemic sales, which is great. No complaint there. I appreciate the bump sticking around, but it highlights this volatility that we're still trying to track. And when we do projections, which these economists and budget analysts do, they're trying to smooth this out. And we're just coming out of this pandemic effect. So we're feeling very unsure overall of what the future holds here. So I'm going to roll into questions. I know we had a couple come in already. So we'll go through those first. Then I was going to do the ones in the room. I think there's only like 3 or 4 online, right? Oh, we're at 7. Okay, so maybe we'll do half of those, then we'll go to the room, and then we'll do the other half and give it some time to come in. So with us from Budget and Economics Program, we have Brandy and Camilla. Who wants to read off the first one? Well, James, that was the perfect segue into something I was going to say on the next slide. So we are in the place of drafting these policy option packages. We haven't robustly going into what that means and how this is different this biennium. So what we have laid out on here for general fund is what we have submitted to the governor's office. And what we have been provided is that we will not add more to this without conversations with them and letting them review those additions. So if it's not there as a policy option package now, the way to get there is to bring it to our attention. We will have a conversation with the governor's office and we will see if they are interested in including that or modifying one of our POPs. And you said that was James again? So first thing I want to say is, if folks want to come up and answer these questions, I'm happy to. And you can correct me. That one is fairly easy because Sarah works with budget and economics, and I know Brandy and Sarah know this answer. It is not part of base budget. That's why we're asking for it as a policy option package. Oh, well, sorry. Okay, so yeah, you guys are gonna have to come up here. That first one I can't, that was a long one. I'll do the second one. It was a question about Oregon Conservation and Recreation Fund and whether it is in our base agency budget yet, and it is not. Yeah. That's what she's doing now.
So the question was, will ODFW, is that right? Yeah, will ODFW request funding for 2 additional fish biologists on the Klamath fish reintroduction effort for a total of 4 staff bios? Trout Unlimited would strongly support a POP with that so Oregon can fully implement the reintroduction plan and related monitoring.
So James, just to be clear, the positions that we got in 2024 were permanent, so those will carry forward in our base. And then we are requesting an additional, let me get my glasses on here. We are going to be requesting an additional NRS 1 and 3 BSAs. So it's a little bit more than 4 additional total.
One more question from James with Trout Unlimited. What does the ARB include for anti-poaching funds that would be passed on to the Oregon State Police in the next biennium? More specifically, does it include funds for any new equipment that would support OSP's anti-poaching efforts, such as image stabilizing binoculars or night vision units? Trout Unlimited wants troopers to have the best modern technology available for that important work.
Yeah, thank you, James via Camilla. So the question is around the agency request budget. So again, we take our base budget and then we add investments and reductions to it. So right now it would roll in as a base budget item. We have not run reduction scenarios. It is a general fund funded program. So there's always a chance any program like that would make it on the reduction. And then, you know, the governor's office will let us know what they're doing with the reduction exercise down the road. The second part of that question was, is there any new money for equipment? Since it rolls in as a base program item, there wouldn't be additional money there, and we have not submitted anything, a policy option package for the agency to do that, but you are talking about Oregon State Police's budget. Casey, if you want to just shake your head or nod your head, are you guys submitting anything for an anti-poaching campaign related to that? No policy option package there either from Oregon State Police. Okay, so that's 3. Why don't we pause and yeah. Sorry, thank you.
No.
Any folks in the room? All right, Bob, I saw you first. I'll repeat them.
in here, go petition, back to the governor, and then eventually get a little, here's the thing for prioritization here, or money to our special governor's decision once we get to the office.
Thanks, Bob. So I'll repeat the question first, and there were two. Sounds like we had a repeat of bullets, like a formatting issue that you wanted to point out for wildlife coexistence. Yeah. Okay. Well, I appreciate knowing that because we are going to post this, so we'll get that corrected. So thank you for that. And then the other one is more around this process, this new process the administration laid out. The May 16th meeting, we will have more materials that people can comment on. And what we've been asked to do is to work with partners and our commissioner and board to share with the governor's office what is being supported. And that includes some look at prioritization, right? We just talked the other day as we're building this POP table, very draft POP table. Well, do we number them? Well, no, because then you get this look at prioritization. Our commission has been interested in learning how to learn from this governor's office that they will engage on prioritization of the POPs and approving what's in and out. I don't know if those conversations have happened between the chair and the policy advisor, but our direction is we are to take that feedback for the governor's office. They will be making the decision. Mike. Thanks. Okay, Mike, sorry. Sure, Mike. To repeat the question, where are we at with submitting POPs to the governor's office and vetting? And Debbie's going to answer.
So essentially, we've everything that you've heard on these new investments, we have submitted to the governor's office. So they're what we consider they're in the hopper. There's going to be a lot more conversation about what happens with those requests. And the reality is, at the end of the day, the governor will do a budget, right? And it's going to include us and many others, and that's where the priority setting will happen. But for now, we're excited that we're able to talk about all of these. So, and I do think that's where you all come in terms of helping to support the agency.
Amy? No, this is license, indirect. Yeah.
Now be adding the other thing in that conversation as to where we are offering.
Yeah, thank you. So the first question was on the slide that's on the screen that's labeled administration license and direct investment proposals. Are those POPs that would use license fund? Yes, they are. And then the second question was where do we engage in this process? And in the past, we'll just recognize in the past with the governor's office, there are other administrations, there has been this link in between either policy advisors or legislative coordinators with them. I don't know if that door is open or there. Again, I want to say what we've been directed to do is it's our work to have these conversations over the next few months. What do you like? What do you not like? What's important to you? What do you support? What would you change? Those kind of things. And then bring that to our commission, which is normal kind of process, kind of summarize this public comment and then say, this is why we shaped it this way, and then move it through. Investments are a big deal because you don't want competing investments from your agencies for a lot of resources. And that's why I think the vetting program is done. You've got a large number of POPs submitted by a large number of agencies, and they are taking their time diligently to look at these, especially through those focal areas of where are we really doing customer service, where are we doing climate resiliency. For us, that's species resiliency as well. All of that alignment. Hearing about that from you guys, like I see this tie into the governor's priorities and this means something to you, I think will mean something to them and our commission. Yep. Commissioner King. Oh no, Mike. Yeah, Mike has one and then we got 4 more online, so. Yes, and you have counted 25. We actually have more than that. I was going to highlight it on the next slide to tease you guys to keep coming to our budget page. We have technical adjustment POPs because this will be part of the exercise when you do a reduction scenario of like, what are you going to give up for something? And we saw that last biennium. So we always take this exercise very seriously. And we look at this kind of efficiency and repurposing and that. And we've done that in several technical adjustments. We didn't highlight it here today, but you'll get to see the list on Monday if you go to the budget page when we post it. And that's where we start needing feedback on individually on these POPs. And we're going to continue to refine these. These are very draft. I mentioned we were feeling a little behind the curve. Usually we start developing narratives by now, but we were a little uncertain about the vetting process and when we would know if stuff was in or out. And then we've got the green light. No, you can go ahead and start talking about these and see what support and interest you garner. Yeah. So Mike asked if there's still space for changes, edits, modifications to the POP list. I took it as, yeah, we are very much in the draft realm. When I looked at the list that came from Fish and Wildlife Programs, when we build these, we always look at what our partners have been saying and emphasizing. A lot of it's carryover to, we feel like we know where some interest is. You are always welcome to correct us if you think, no. We think you thought we wanted this, but we're actually more interested in this. That's great information because then we know what support we're going to get when it comes as a bill in the legislature. Go ahead, Debbie.
Does that answer your question, Mike? Like, we're going to have all of the other funds, all that kind of stuff coming later. These general fund, those are the new investments that we have to put a lot of energy on. We won't be adding, and I think Shannon actually said that earlier. Our sense is that as an agency, we probably won't be adding new general fund asks because what you're seeing today is what we got kind of this green light to at least be talking about. But within what we're kind of teeing up, there's lots of room to, I think, hear from folks about kind of how we might frame it differently, how we might package it differently. But I don't think that we're being encouraged to add more to our list. So just to be clear.
You can edit one way.
Yeah. So Shannon, I know you know me well. You know what I'm going to ask, which is why you always shake your head. Okay, so this slide, we're talking about licensing and the website. Can you go back to the slide where the DI and the language is? Because I think that's general fund, right?
Yep, you got it.
So Because we have asked for that position. We've asked some iteration of that. PI or language, I think over 3 cycles now, and we always, that never
It's 2.
seems to make the cut of the
Yeah.
governor's budget, but it's in ours. So is there a way? I mean, I'm just asking, because we've got this new process now. Does it maybe not come from general funds? And do we link it to the licensing or do we link it to the website? Because all of that is linked. That it never makes the cut. Like, you know, when you're doing a website redesign, you're gonna need language specialists with it. Like, I mean, that's all together and somehow that message never gets through. And every 2 years, we have the same conversation. So I would like your thoughts.
And the question is, should you be strategic about asking for the policy option package with DEI coordinator and language specialist and web and look at the fund type you're asking for? That's paraphrasing, but yeah, that's exactly this exercise and why things may be edited different ways than where we originally thought we were landing. I'll just say, honestly, I'd have to go back and look about what's been in and out and when it's been in the budget, but it is a constrained environment asking for general fund. Been here a lot of years. It's always kind of surprising what does make it through and what doesn't. What I like about this governor's administration is her priorities are very clear. Be in alignment with those. That is our best case that we can make for these investments and additions.
And, you know, I'm struggling to understand, like, are we asking it wrong? Or like, what exactly is?
Yeah. Commissioner Kingbeck's feedback I've gotten from answering a similar question is it is the work of everyone in the agency to do this. So there is a weakness of saying, well, you have one person whose job that is. There is a big effort among state agencies. There's a big effort among state agencies that for fish and wildlife conservation, and then we have a diversity, equity, and inclusion office out of the governor. So there is a big movement here and an emphasis on this, like you just said. At the end of the day, I can't tell you why this is successful or not. You did ask about the language specialist and tying it with the web, and I will say part of the holdup on these positions is we just got that approved out of the 23-25. Well, we got that approved out of the 23 sessions. We got it put in the 23-25 budget. And then we kind of took a step back and said, oh, yeah, this person who's building this website would be the perfect person to have bilingual translation skills for the reason you said. So we have been working with DAS to put that in that position. So that's an idea of like repurposing resources we have to make this work and get there in the end. Yeah. Yeah, great questions. I see Stan has one. Stan had a great recommendation of tying your language specialist and DEI coordination efforts into our recruitment, reactivation, and retention of hunters and anglers and wildlife viewers in the state. I think that's a great idea. We actually have our R3 coordinator in the room, and Antonio comes to me pretty regularly with these other funding options where we can get them done. That is the work of our people. When you have staff resources, they go hunt for that down. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has some funding too. I agree. That's a great suggestion. Okay. Hi, Casey. Sorry.
So thank you for that. It's a great thank you very much. I wanted to clarify, just the slide with the natural time. What was that particular?
That was a typo. That's another one of the big.
Okay.
Yeah. that-
Okay,
that-
good catch.
I'll fix that one when we post it.
I didn't think it was you already have.
Just reiterate what that it was a continuation for expenditure.
Oh, yeah.
That
Yeah.
makes
I'll need to reiterate that.
Yeah, and maybe the question piece too.
Okay.
What Casey's referring to.
Okay, yes. We have a prize for you at the door. So Casey's question was around my Habitat Division slide where we were talking about 25-27 investments, and in the Natural Climate Solutions Fund, what we'll be looking for there is just continuing the expenditure authority to expend the funds that we were given in this legislative session, as well as the position authority. Thank you for catching that. We'll make sure it's more clear next go around. Yeah, thank you. Should I repeat? Okay, I'll try to paraphrase that. I think it was not a question so much as a comment about the importance of those regional habitat biologists, and in the different parts of the state where land use issues are so important, just having that ODFW representation is really valuable. Thanks, Casey.
Questions in the room? Amy. I'm totally glad you came.
Quick question on the off the, will that be wildlife lab? That or I have an idea of where that capacity.
So while Bernadette's walking up here, Amy's question was about the CWD positions and where they would be placed.
Yeah, that's basically the same package that we included last time and was considered in the short session. So it would be one permanent position in the health lab and then 9 seasonals around the state. So, right, so the short session bill was just a one-time funding, so that will cover this biennium, current biennium, so this would be looking to extend that into the future.
Thank you. So Commissioner King just passed on, folks are having trouble submitting questions. Again, if that link's not working, we're going to put up another portal in a similar location. You can submit questions that way. You can also submit through the odfnw.commission at odfnw.org and .gov. Any other questions in the room? Mike has one.
Having said that, start talking about life. That's true. already now that are pro having more. Like the most powerful thing. As we address all of the inflationary increase. That can be
So Mike commented first on the importance of the North American model for funding fish and wildlife conservation, and that being our base for a lot of using non-dedicated funds in important ways to get work done that we don't have other funding sources to, and has traditionally been the model that most people know and refer to. But the important part of that are we have that and additions to it in general fund, other fund. And then Mike commented on the importance of really looking for an alternative funding source that's sustainable and large, in addition to this 23-25 budget we have in that model. Totally get that. And then what you just said, Mike, I'm glad this is being recorded. Maybe I can pick it up. Those comments are really important, and that support is really important as well, because that's what we want to bring to you May 16th. So I kind of alluded to it, 2025, we've got this small gap and we're not really projecting that we're in dire straits. If you look out further if you go in 2027, we'll bring that. And then what does a fee adjustment look like if you do it in 2025 incrementally to fill that gap? But if you wait and that gap does grow, what do you need? And then what the difference is. And we will bring that in May 16th, and we'll want to hone in on that conversation with you guys. Let me repeat that. Okay. So Bob, let's take your question while Brandy and Camilla are coming up.
I'm on the license side.
But I'm not keep that on the.
The alternative funding is a much more urgent.
Okay, well, these folks are coming up. Bob's comment was alternative funding, looking for something sustainable, big enough to fund significant conservation efforts, highly important. Doesn't have the exact same doesn't have the same timeliness feel, because we've been talking about this for a long time and it's very needed. I'll phrase it that way. Okay, go ahead and read it.
All right, from Mark Stern. For informational purposes, I would like to share with you that the ODFW POP for the Oregon Conservation and Recreation Fund for the current biennium was $3 million, as endorsed by the ODFW Commission. The POP under consideration now for the upcoming biennium dropped to $1 million. The OCRF provides grant funds in support of Oregon conservation strategy, wildlife and nature-based viewing, and recreational opportunities, and reaches out to underrepresented communities to encourage their engagement in wildlife and recreation-based activities. The anticipated requests for funding from project applicants this next biennium will likely be 15 to 20 million. The present 1 million POP request will only fund about 5% of the anticipated need. The OCRF funded projects typically have match, and with that match, OCRF funds are able to leverage ODFW dollars significantly to further achieve goals of OCRF. Given the successes of OCRF and the obvious need, would it be appropriate for ODFW to consider increasing the POP to 3 million as in the last biennium, rather than dropping the POP to 1 million? Thank you.
I was going to repeat the question. Total brain moment there. I think Deputy Director Colbert said it. I don't think it was me. I think it was her that said, we're really not looking to add here. What we have submitted to the governor's office, you know, editing down out might be acceptable, but we're really not encouraged to make additions. That being said, we will take the comment and we will bring it to both our commission and our governor's office that there's a real I know you're not going to be the only one. The folks commenting on the importance of the Oregon Conservation Recreation Fund and that they would like to see a larger investment there.
And my apologies in advance for any mispronunciation, but this is from Charlie Plybon with Surfrider Foundation on behalf of Oregon Ocean Alliance. And Charlie's question, House Bill 4132 established new mandates for ODFW's Marine Reserve Program and allocated an additional $894,000 for the current biennium and creates an additional fiscal impact of $1.1 million and 3 FTE positions for the program in the 2025-27 biennium. How can constituents track this and the overall program budget within the coming biennium, or will it be reflected with an additional POP?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for checking me, Matt. Yeah, since it becomes permanent part of our budget, you will see it in the Fish Division Marine Program allocation. If there's a need, a question to ask about those positions, where they're at, where they're residing, you have our contact with our Fish Division administrator, and he can update you on their status. It is tough in this budget that we have. When we print it off, it's 3,000 pages. So for the public to go in and basically say, okay, I can look myself and I can see it's there and I feel comfortable. Unfortunately, you don't really have access that way. You have to rely on one of us. And Fish Division would be your direct contact for asking those questions in the future to ensure that it's there. Did that answer all that question? Well, okay. Thank you.
All right, next question from Christina Wolznikowski with the Gorge Commission. Are the POPs presented by your divisions already flagged to move forward by Governor Kotek as part of the January 22nd POP submission, and now you are seeking public input? Will you please add any other, or will you add any other POPs if the public or your commission requests them?
Yeah, thanks, Christina. I just want to say this is a grouping of questions that came in before the meeting and after the meeting. So I know that we're repeating some questions and information here. We did submit to the governor's office in January as expected. We have heard back that we are good to talk about what we submitted. We also know that we have 2 more dates where we'll hear from them, kind of a draft vetting time where they'll let us know and they want to have a conversation about what we're hearing, and then maybe a more final one in May, which means the earliest opportunity we would be able to share if there is any direction about what's in, out, added, anything from their end would be our June commission meeting, and that's when we would bring it then. The other part of that question was, again, back to adding. I will stress we have not been encouraged to add to this list.
This one is from Saristi Kamal with Western Environmental Law Center, Oregon Wildlife Coalition. Common theme in this question around OCRF. So OCRF is one of our priorities, their priorities in ODFW's budget. In the last biennium, OCRF awarded about $1 million per RFP and skipped one cycle. And even then, it represents only 25% of the total proposals that came in. 2023-25 biennium, the POP request was $3 million. Why a reduced ask this time when the demand is only increasing and OCS is one of the most underfunded areas at ODFW? How do we advocate to increase this allocation for a priority area for us to at least $3 million this biennium? And then comment, most of the current funding for OCRF is restricted funding, which while beneficial, doesn't allow the OCRF to fully fulfill their original role of implementing the Oregon Conservation Strategy.
So again, I love hearing the comments on Oregon Conservation Recreation Fund and the support for it. And we are by no means trying to discourage that support. Bob has already mentioned a lot of conversations around alternative fund, and OCRF was actually built out of this conversation. So that was, one area we were actually successful in getting, not the full ask, but something provided for direct recreation and conservation funding stream. Again, it's public comment. I'll be taking it to the commission. We'll also be taking it to the governor's office, and we'll stress for them again that there is this interest in seeing this POP general fund ask increased. We'll supply that information for them. There is a recognition, I think Christy laid it out really well. In the past, folks have been ineffective at times in asking for these increases and then not at other times. And I understand the frustration with that to some degree, why I appreciate the clear direction of, when the door is open and when it closes, because I think people are really getting frustrated that they're not being heard. But we very much appreciate hearing the support for Oregon Conservation Recreation Fund and that we want it to continue in the state.
All right, next question from Liz Hamilton with NSIA. Given the significant federal funds supporting ODF missions and obligations, is ODFW considering an assigned FTE to work with stakeholders and the Oregon delegation to ensure appropriate levels of federal funds are secured? The work ahead in the Columbia to support the Columbia River Basin Restoration Initiative and the USG commitments is even more intensive than negotiating the stay of litigation. The work is not only to protect fish and fisheries, but will involve hundreds of millions investment in Oregon. And has ODFW budgeted the FTEs necessary to carry out this work forward? What funds are you seeking in response to SB 1509?
You can come on up, Mike. I saw you leaning in. Do you have dedicated positions to do that work? That's what I would sum that up for. Not in a policy option package ask. However, I think this is one you might want to mulligan out to come back and we will answer that question May 16th if you want.
Yeah, I think that would be better. We are committed, to making sure that we have the staff currently to carry this through though. But yeah, we need to come back.
Yeah, and it's a look at existing staff resources and then your ask and what we're dedicating there. We'll give you a more complete answer. Yeah.
So this question is a similar theme, and so I think the answer that just provided will cover, but we'll get it on the record. So from Sean Miller at the Coastal Conservation Association, question: with the passage of Senate Bill 1509 last session, will ODFW consider a placeholder POP for money to support a gillnet buyback program, which will occur in an interim work group? I would say similar answer to what in terms of discussing it later in May.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, I think we can bring that one back, mainly from the front of it. There isn't an ask there now. But when you get into running a bill in legislative session, we can better describe where that process is versus in an agency request budget and a policy option package entry. And I think that would be a better question served to bring back at the May 16th meeting and line that out.
Right, next question. This one's a short clarifying question from Joe Lebeski with the Bird Alliance of Oregon. Is the 1.14 million and 3 FTE for marine reserves in the current request to the budget to the governor's office?
So that similar question to a topic that came up earlier, and those positions were given to us this biennium as permanent positions, so they will roll up into our base budget for 25-27. And then I believe the last one, I think it was more maybe an observation comment from Oregon Ocean Alliance. It seemed like there was maybe a time where people were having trouble, some people were having trouble submitting with the form. And just a reminder, I'd say that to what Shannon mentioned earlier, on Monday, if you go back to our budget information webpage, we'll have a new link with a new focused question form. So if you didn't get a chance to submit something today and you have a question or comment to submit, you can take advantage of that forum.
You can not time that better with 2 more minutes. I got one more slide.
Okay.
I will shut it down.
Yeah.
Can either answer them later or not. Well, I'll start with saying a thank you again. I love that this worked, that we actually got people to engage virtually with a lot of great questions and comments. Again, I appreciate the folks that are here in person so that we can talk to you. Commissioner King, thank you again. This slide, I was going to cover a lot about what you can expect to see on Monday on our ODFW About Us budget page for 25-27. I'll skip over what you've already heard, but you will start to see fuller proposals around these POPs, including those technical adjustments. We are going to complete that program prioritization exercise that we're required to do, and that will be put in this location. And then before the May 16th meeting, probably right before, we'll have materials that include the reduction scenarios that we are statutorily required to put forward. Again, we'll have a link up where, that's weird, where you can answer 3 very specific questions that we are drafting for you to answer. And then there will be a comment box in there where you could submit more questions or additional comments. Again, can't thank you enough for bringing the ones that you did today. And then we've started out this next engagement meeting that we are rapidly preparing for on May 16th. And with that, we'll close you out and just say thank you again very much and safe travels home.